So we're going to talk about German unification today, and very much like Italian unification, keep the word realpolitik in mind. Think about how a lot of the strategies that were implemented in order to unify Germany were much more pragmatic than nationalistic or romantic, even though sometimes they do use nationalism to their advantage. So let's go back to 1848 briefly to understand where Germany is in its plans to unify, and remember that there already was an attempt at unification back in 1848, but it was a failure. Okay, so remember, at first you had kind of two different plans in 1848 for unification. One of them was proposed by the Frankfurt Assembly, right? They had this liberal constitution set up. They wanted King Frederick William to become the emperor of the new unified Germany, but Frederick William rejected the Constitution. He said he would not accept the throne from the gutter. Does this sound familiar? And then Frederick William is also going to try to unify Germany, but what he does is he includes Austria in this new unified Germany. And here's the problem. If you think about that, now this map shows Austria is not part of the unification, right? But if Austria were part of the new German state, think about how Austria might be overpowered by the rest of the German Confederation. It does not want that, right? So Austria rejects Frederick William's plan to unify Germany, including Austria, because Austria wants to stay dominant in the German Confederation. Up until this point, Austria was always a leader in the German Confederation, and it really didn't want to lose power if Germany unified, even if Austria was included. Okay, so this brings us to the two different plans that had that kind of came about to imagine how to unify Germany. There was the Grossdeutsch plan, which was actually what we were just discussing. Gross means all in German, so it would be including Austria in addition to all the different German states, right? So the Grossdeutsch plan would be a Germany that included Austria, and the Kleinsdeutsch plan, Klein means without, right? So the Kleinsdeutsch plan would be a Germany without Austria, okay? We're going to find out pretty quickly, pretty obviously, that the Kleinsdeutsch plan is the one that prevails. Okay, so kind of the window towards unification is the Zollverein, which we talked about in the Industrial Revolution chapter. Okay, so just as a review, remember that this is a German customs union or a German tariff union. Basically, this was a way to grow Germany's economy as it started to industrialize. So it's created in 1834, and what it does is it prevents there from being any tariffs issued within the Zollverein, right? So you could freely trade throughout this entire area. So this is going to be huge. It's going to lead to some serious economic industrial growth in Germany. But as you can see from this map, Austria is not included. It was excluded from the Zollverein. So because of that, it's going to provide a huge source of tension between Prussia and Austria. And it's also going to sort of provide a foundation for the potential political map of Germany. The economic unification comes first, followed by the political unification. Actually, it's a relatively common pattern in a lot of sort of unification movements throughout history, but so Germany is definitely not alone in this. Actually, before we talk about Bismarck, I want to talk a little bit more about about the importance of the Zollverein and what this does to the relationship between Austria and Germany. So Austria actually tries to destroy the Zollverein, but it is unsuccessful in doing so. And what we're going to see is that because Germany is so successful in the Zollverein, Austria feels challenged in terms of its political position in the German Confederation. Remember before I was saying that throughout the German Confederation, Austria was always the most powerful. Now you're going to see that it's going to be sort of undermined by Germany. And Germany has this economic bolster towards unification, and this time they want to go with that Kleinsdeutsch plan. So the Grossdeutsch plan is not going to work. Now Germany is moving towards unifying without Austria, all right? And so actually Prussia already is going to start to prepare to potentially go to war with Austria. Some of this is also due to what's going on in Italy. We already talked about Italian unification, but remember that Austria still possesses Venetia, so we're going to see how that comes into play as well. So there's already a lot of tension But what we're going to see here first is that you need to have some sort of leader emerge. Of course, we had Cavour in Italian unification. So now we have Bismarck, and this is going to show us how Germany starts to develop the military strength that it needs in order to really unify and get Austria out of the picture. So Bismarck was from Junker background, so from a pretty high economic background. He became the prime minister under King William I. And the most important thing that happens early on in his leadership is that he's able to establish that the king prevails in particular in military decisions over parliament. So what's happening when Bismarck actually comes into power? The Prussian parliament, or the Frankfurt Parliament, we've already talked about them, they don't like the fact that Germany is militarizing. They also want Parliament to have power over the military rather than the king. And like many states, Parliament does have power over the purse, so it definitely has control of the military budget. And so this is actually what leads to Bismarck coming into power completely, because the king proposes a military budget, Parliament rejects it, so then King William I appoints Otto von Bismarck to be the prime minister of Prussia because he doesn't want Parliament to be able to dictate this military budget. And this is where Otto von Bismarck comes up with this idea that shows his connection to realpolitik. Okay, so Bismarck says that that if there should be a stalemate in government, if the king and parliament continue to disagree over a certain issue, then the king should have ultimate authority. The king should prevail, as this slide says, right? He calls this gap theory. Basically, if there's a gap, basically because the Constitution doesn't really say what happens in the event of a stalemate, and the military budget was creating a stalemate, right? So he basically says, you know what, the king should have power in this instance. And also this, so this shows us realpolitik because this shows us that rather than dealing with kind of the continued deliberations within Parliament, he just assigns power to one person. It makes it much, not necessarily better, you could say, if you're against military conquest, but it was more efficient, right, by just putting the power in the king's hand or in Bismarck's hand. And Bismarck was quoted as saying that the greatest questions of the day will not be decided by speeches and resolutions, but by blood and iron. So in other words, he felt like the parliament going back and forth in through discussion was not actually going to achieve its end goal. It was not going to achieve unification, but blood and iron, right? The idea that might makes right, the idea that the ends justify the means. This is very Machiavellian in nature, very, very realpolitik. So also he is nicknamed the Iron Chancellor because of his attitude towards who should have political control, the idea of blood and iron, Iron Chancellor. He is very much authoritarian and he's kind of squashing the liberalism of the parliament. But at the same time, remember that the Frankfurt Parliament failed to achieve unification in 1848. So maybe, kind of one person seizing control over the government did make the unification process more efficient. So what does he do in order to start to build the power of Germany? Well, he first off, he continues to expand and reorganize the military, so it gets larger and larger. Already you can tell he kind of has potential wars, especially with Austria, in the back of his head. He's also going to keep collecting taxes. Now, this is important because, of course, in order to have a larger military, you need to have a lot of tax revenue. But it's also important because Parliament did not approve of the budget. So what does Bismarck do? He just looks completely over them and collects the taxes anyway. This also shows us kind of how much Bismarck can control the people. Technically, Parliament had not approved of the budget, but at the same time, just because of this kind of the strict military nature of Bismarck's rule, the people were too afraid not to pay taxes, so they do, and the military continues to grow. There were some voters that opposed Bismarck, and so there was a period in the 1860s where some of them sent liberal majorities to the parliament, but at the same time, Bismarck just continued to defy the parliament. It really didn't matter if there were liberals in there, they still weren't going to be able to control Bismarck. So how do we start to move towards unification besides just building up the military? Like we know with Italy, another important step in the process is war. So the Prussian-Danish War comes first. You might remember under the Frankfurt Assembly, we talked about these areas way to the north called Schleswig-Holstein. There was sort of a cultural issue as to whether or not these areas should be part of Denmark or should be part of Prussia. So basically, in 1863, the Prussian-Danish War is trying to solve that question. So what Germany wants to do is they want to control Schleswig and Holstein. They believe that these were rightfully German territories. And at this point, this is interesting. Despite the fact that Austria is upset about the Zollverein, they still are, I guess, unified with Germany enough to actually come to Germany's side militarily and help defeat Denmark. So it's because of Austria's assistance that Schleswig and Holstein are taken from Germany and Denmark. Denmark cedes them to both Germany and Austria. They are jointly ruled between Austria and Germany, but this is a little bit of a problem because Germany and Austria cannot agree as to how to rule these territories. So actually, this is going to be a big precursor to war between Prussia and Austria, or the Austro-Prussian War. Okay, so Bismarck wanted Austria's military help, but it did not want Austria to be ruling Schleswig-Holstein. Bismarck's goal was to control all of northern Germany and exclude Austria, get Austria out of there. So you can see, again, this is kind of a realpolitik strategy. They're using Austria for their military power, but then at the same time, in the background, they are preparing to get Austria out of this area completely. So there's a saying that you should always have two irons in the fire. Ultimately, you see that Bismarck has two different plans, right? Bring Austria in to help defeat Schleswig-Holstein, but at the same time, let's figure out a way to actually defeat Austria militarily at the same time so that Germany can finally be unified. So we'll pick up with that in a video just in a second, with the Austro-Prussian War and what Germany looks like after unification.